Imagine leaving everything behind, your home, your family, the life you've always known, just because a voice, a divine whisper, calls you into the unknown. Would you go? Would you trust enough to step into the darkness, not knowing where your feet might land? This is the heart-stopping moment Abraham faced, a moment that would change the course of history. His story isn't just ancient scripture, it's a gripping tale of faith, sacrifice, and the ultimate test of trust in God. And today we're diving deep into one of the most pivotal chapters in the Bible. The call to Abraham. The world Abraham lived in was steeped in idol worship, a place where gods were carved from stone and wood, where people clung to rituals but had lost the heart of true devotion. Then out of nowhere, the real God speaks, not to a king or a prophet, but to an ordinary man named Abram. The command was simple yet terrifying. Leave your country, your people, and your father's household, and go to the land I will show you. No map, no guarantees, just a promise. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. What would you do if God asked you to walk away from everything familiar? This wasn't just a physical journey, it was a spiritual revolution. Abraham's obedience set in motion a covenant that would shape the destiny of nations. But here's the thing. Faith like this doesn't come easy. Along the way, there were doubts, fears, and moments where Abraham stumbled. He lied about his wife. He questioned God's timing. Yet through every failure, God's promise remained unshaken. Why? Because this story isn't just about Abraham. It's about you. It's about what happens when ordinary people say yes to an extraordinary God. But just when it seems like Abraham's faith has been proven, God asks for the unthinkable. The son he waited decades for, the child of the promise, Isaac. Take your son, your only son, whom you love, and sacrifice him. The command is so shocking, so devastating, that even now, thousands of years later, it leaves us breathless. How could a loving God demand such a thing? What kind of test is this? And what does Abraham's agonizing choice reveal about the nature of true faith? This is where the story takes a turn so intense, so loaded with tension, that we have to pause right here. Because what happens next will shake you to your core. Was Abraham really about to lose everything? Or was God preparing a revelation so powerful it would echo through eternity? The answer lies in the knife raised over Isaac, in the fire ready to consume the sacrifice, and in the voice that would speak one last time. To understand the weight of Abraham's decision, we have to step back into his world, a world completely different from ours, yet filled with the same human struggles. Abraham, originally named Abram, wasn't some legendary hero from birth. He was just a man living in Ur of the Chaldeans, a city buzzing with trade, culture, and pagan worship. His father Terah was an idol maker, crafting gods out of wood and stone for people to bow down to. Imagine growing up in that environment, surrounded by false gods, and then one day hearing the voice of the real God. It's no wonder this call was so radical. God wasn't just asking him to pack up and move, he was asking Abram to leave behind an entire way of life, to reject everything he'd ever known. And yet Abram went, not because he had all the answers, but because something or someone compelled him to take that first step. The journey wasn't smooth. There were famines, battles, moments of fear where Abram took matters into his own hands. He even tried to fulfill God's promise of an heir through his wife's servant, Hagar, which led to conflict that still echoes today. But through every failure, God kept speaking, kept leading, kept reminding Abram of his promise. Look up at the heavens and count the stars if you can. So shall your offspring be. Then in a moment that must have felt like a divine joke, God changed Abram's name to Abraham, father of many nations. The problem? He was nearly 100 years old and his wife Sarah was well past childbearing age. Laughter must have turned to stunned silence when God said Sarah would have a son. And when Isaac was finally born, the joy must have been overwhelming. After decades of waiting, the promise was real, tangible, resting in Abraham's arms. But then, the unthinkable. Take your son, your only son, whom you love, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering." The command is so jarring, so contrary to everything we know about God's character, that it stops us cold. Why would God give a son only to ask for him back? Was this a test, a lesson, or something deeper, something that would foreshadow an even greater sacrifice centuries later? The Bible doesn't record Abraham's emotions in that moment. Did he weep? Did he argue? Did his hands shake as he gathered the wood for the fire? All we know is that early the next morning, he set out with Isaac and 2 servants, his heart heavy with a burden no parent should ever bear. Isaac, unaware of what was coming, carried the wood up the mountain himself, the same wood that would soon become his funeral pyre. And then, the question that must have shattered Abraham's heart. "Father, where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" The knife was in Abraham's hand. The fire was ready. The boy was bound. In that agonizing moment, everything hung in the balance. Was Abraham really about to lose the son he loved? Or was God about to reveal something so profound, it would change the way we understand faith forever? The answer is coming, but not yet, because this is where we must pause, where the tension becomes almost unbearable. What happens next will challenge everything you thought you knew about obedience, sacrifice, and the heart of God. As Abraham raised the knife over his bound son, time must have stood still. Every parent's worst nightmare was unfolding in that moment, not by accident, not by tragedy, but by divine command. The air was thick with the smell of burning wood, and the unspoken question, how could a good God ask this? Isaac's wide, trusting eyes looking up at his father, the ropes cutting into his wrists, the weight of the promise hanging between them. This was faith tested to its absolute limit. But let's not forget Sarah. While Abraham and Isaac were climbing Mount Moriah, she was back home, unaware of what was happening. Imagine her waiting, perhaps humming as she prepared a meal, completely oblivious that her husband had taken their miracle child to offer him as a sacrifice. What would happen when, or if, Abraham returned alone? The promise of descendants as countless as the stars rested on Isaac. If he was gone, did that mean God's word had failed? The emotional turmoil behind this story is almost too much to bear. And what about Isaac? He wasn't a helpless child. Scripture suggests he was likely a young man by this point, strong enough to carry the wood up the mountain. He could have resisted. He could have run, but he didn't. There's a haunting silence in his submission, a foreshadowing of another son who would one day carry wood up a hill, surrendering to his father's will. The parallels are too striking to ignore. Meanwhile, the servants waited at the base of the mountain, confused. They had seen the fire and the knife, but where was the lamb? The tension in their whispered questions only deepens the mystery. And just when it seems all hope is lost, when the blade glints in the sunlight, when Abraham's arm tenses for the final unthinkable act, something extraordinary happens. But we're not there yet, because before the resolution, we have to sit in this unbearable moment, where faith and fear collide, where every instinct screams, this can't be right. Yet obedience demands the unthinkable. What happens next will redefine everything, but for now the knife is still in the air, and the outcome hangs by a thread. The knife trembled in Abraham's weathered hand as the fire crackled nearby, its hungry flames casting flickering shadows across Isaac's face. Every fiber of Abraham's being must have screamed to stop, to untie his son, to run far from this terrible place. Yet his arm remained steady, not from lack of emotion, but from a faith so deep it could withstand even this unimaginable test. The scent of burning wood mixed with the salt of Abraham's tears as he drew in one shuddering breath, preparing to do the unthinkable. Isaac's quiet whimper cut through the mountain air like a knife. "Father," he whispered, his voice breaking with confusion and dawning horror. The wood beneath him felt rough against his back, the ropes chafing his wrists where he'd stopped struggling. In that moment, the boy became a man, not through strength, but through surrender. His wide, trusting eyes locked with Abraham's, searching for answers his father couldn't give. The same eyes that had sparkled with joy when Abraham had told him stories of God's promises now brimmed with terrified questions. High above, a lone eagle circled, its shadow passing over the altar like some ancient omen. The wind carried the scent of sacrifice upward, as if the mountain itself was holding its breath. Somewhere in the distance a branch snapped. Was it just the wind or something more? Abraham's muscles tensed, his grip tightening on the knife's worn handle. This was the moment, the culmination of every step of obedience, every act of faith across decades of waiting and wondering. As the blade began its terrible descent, a sound pierced the heavy silence. Not a voice, not yet, but the rustle of movement in the nearby thicket. Abraham's arm froze mid-swing, his heart pounding like a drum in his chest. Was this divine intervention, or just another cruel twist of fate? The bushes trembled again, and in that suspended moment between life and death, between obedience and mercy, everything hung in perfect, terrible balance. The next instant would change everything. But for now, time stood still, the knife hovering inches from Isaac's chest, the fire's heat pressing against Abraham's face like the very breath of God. As Abraham's knife hung suspended in that breathless moment, the thicket suddenly erupted with movement. A desperate bleating shattered the silence as a ram burst forth, its curved horns tangled in the thorny branches. The animal's panicked eyes locked with Abraham's, its flanks heaving as it struggled against the vines that held it captive. Time seemed to fracture. Was this mere coincidence or divine intervention? Abraham's arm trembled violently now, the knife catching the sunlight as his gaze darted between Isaac's tear-streaked face and the thrashing ram. A choked sob escaped his lips as the realization struck him. This was no accident. The thicket had been growing here for years, waiting for this exact moment. The ram had wandered here at precisely this hour. Every step of this agonizing journey had been leading to this crossroads of despair and deliverance. But just as Abraham began to lower the knife, a new horror gripped him. The ropes binding Isaac had tightened during the struggle, cutting off circulation. His son's lips were turning blue, his breath coming in shallow gasps. The sacrifice might not come from the knife after all. Isaac was slipping away before his eyes. Abraham dropped the blade with a clatter, his fingers scrambling at the knots. But years of weathering had made his hands stiff and clumsy. From the corner of his eye, Abraham noticed movement further down the mountain. The servants he'd left behind were now climbing upward, drawn by the commotion. If they reached the summit and saw Isaac bound on the altar, everything would unravel. The covenant, the promise, the years of waiting, all would be misunderstood. Abraham tore at the ropes with renewed desperation, his prayers coming in ragged bursts. The ram's struggles grew more frantic, its hooves kicking up dust that stung Abraham's eyes. In that blurry moment of pain, he heard something that stopped his heart. Not the voice of an angel, but the unmistakable sound of Sarah's voice calling from somewhere on the mountain path. How had she found them? What would happen when she saw what her husband had nearly done? The ropes finally gave way just as the first scream pierced the air. But whether it came from Sarah spotting the scene or from Isaac gasping his first full breath, Abraham couldn't tell. The real test of faith was only beginning. As Sarah's scream echoed across the mountaintop, time seemed to stop. Abraham turned to see his wife standing frozen on the path, her face a mask of horror as she took in the scene. The altar, the knife, their son gasping on the wood. But before she could rush forward, a voice thundered from heaven, shaking the very ground beneath them. "Abraham, do not lay a hand on the boy." The words vibrated through Abraham's bones, and his hands, still raw from tearing at the ropes, fell to his sides. Isaac drew in a shuddering breath as the last rope fell away, his wide eyes darting between his father and the thicket where the ram still struggled. In that instant, Abraham understood. He lunged for the ram, freeing it from the thorns with trembling hands. The animal, now calm, almost seemed to bow its head as Abraham lifted it onto the altar in Isaac's place. The fire roared to life as the sacrifice was made, the scent of smoke and redemption filling the air. But just as relief began to flood Abraham's heart, the voice spoke again, this time softer, yet carrying a weight that made Sarah, now clutching Isaac to her chest, look up in awe. Because you have not withheld your son, your only son, I swear by myself that I will bless you beyond measure. The promise was renewed, deeper than before. Not just descendants, not just land, but a legacy that would change the world. Then came the twist no one expected. As the family turned to descend the mountain, a stranger emerged from the rocks, an old man with knowing eyes who had watched everything from the shadows. He stepped forward and placed a worn hand on Isaac's shoulder. One day, he whispered, another father will offer his son on a hill not far from here, and when he does, the world will never be the same. With that, the stranger vanished into the wilderness, leaving them staring after him in stunned silence. The walk home was quiet, each lost in their own thoughts. Isaac kept touching his wrist where the ropes had been. Abraham carried the weight of what he'd almost done, and Sarah held tight to her son, her tears still fresh. But beneath the grief and the shock, something new stirred, a dawning understanding that faith isn't about understanding, but about trust, and that sometimes the greatest blessings come from the hardest surrenders. Yet as they reached the base of the mountain, Abraham glanced back one last time. The smoke from the altar still curled into the sky, but now against the setting sun, it looked almost like a bridge between heaven and earth. The test was over. The promise stood. As the family returned home, the weight of what had happened on that mountain settled over them like a heavy cloak. Sarah kept stealing glances at Isaac as he walked ahead, his shoulders squared, but his steps slower than before. She reached for Abraham's hand, her fingers trembling, and he gripped hers tightly, wordless apologies and unspoken relief passing between them. The test was over, but its mark would remain, shaping them in ways they didn't yet understand. Days turned into weeks, and life resumed its rhythm, but nothing was quite the same. Isaac no longer laughed as easily, and Abraham often found himself staring into the distance, replaying that moment on Moriah, the knife, the ram, the voice that had spared his son. Yet in the quiet moments, when the campfire burned low and the stars stretched endlessly above them, Abraham would remember the promise. Through your offspring, all nations will be blessed. It wasn't just about land or descendants anymore. It was about something bigger, something he could only glimpse in fragments. One evening, as Isaac tended the fire, he finally broke the silence. "Father," he said, his voice steady but softer than before, "do you think the stranger was right about another father and son?" Abraham exhaled slowly, watching the flames dance. "I don't know," he admitted. "But if God could provide a ram in our darkest moment, then I have to believe he knows what he's doing, even if we don't." Isaac nodded, and for the first time since the mountain, something like peace settled between them. Years later, when Abraham's hair had turned fully white and Isaac had children of his own, the old man would tell the story around campfires, not as a tale of fear, but of faithfulness, of a God who tested but also provided, of a love so deep it could surrender what mattered most. And though he never saw the stranger again, Abraham sometimes wondered if his words were unfolding somewhere beyond the horizon, in a story greater than his own. The legacy of that day on the mountain lived on, not just in Isaac's children or the nation that would rise from them, but in the quiet truth that faith isn't the absence of fear. It's the choice to trust anyway. And when the night feels darkest, there's always a ram in the thicket. You just have to be willing to see it.